arts in mixed martial arts judging. Just before he starts, I really want to point out a few things that were on the reminder notice sent out earlier on. Obviously, you'll see first of all that we've got a summer schedule to fill. So if you do want to give a talk in the series over the summer, there's a bunch of dates marked as TBC, and so you do feel free to get in touch if you want to take one of those. Excuse me, to present. We've just returned after Easter, after a month's break. We're going to have a couple more weeks off in the next few weeks due to conferences. So you'll be aware of the 11th Football and Finance Conference taking place in Duisburg on May the 6th and 7th. If you submitted to that, your paper has been accepted, and the schedule is going to be sent around this week. 9th and 10th, hopefully hope to see many folk in Gijón for the 19th Gijón Conference on Sports Economics. And then May the 15th is the deadline for the Play the Game conference, which is taking place in Tampere in Finland this year on October the 5th to the 8th. That's organised by Rasmus Storm and colleagues in Scandinavia, and is a really exciting looking event. It looked like a great event last year, and I wish I could have made it. The conference would be on the October the 5th to the 8th. I'll put the link in the chat in a moment, but May the 15th is the abstract deadline for that. And that's enough for the time being. So Georgy, please do go ahead and take away your presentation.
Yep. Thank you very much, James. It is a real pleasure to be here. So as mentioned, I'm going to be presenting about belief, perseverance, and group dynamics in mixed martial arts judging. So before we, formally start, I would like to really position this paper and give some credit when it's due. So I would like to thank Richard Paulson, Skip Crooker over at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, as well as Carl Singleton for recently providing a paper that was accepted to Journal of Sports Economics that is looking at boxing judges' scorecards, as well as the participants of the NACE sessions in Kansas City, Missouri, for the helpful suggestions to completely refurbish this project. So just like what is influencing this project a lot is the literature in behavioral economics, specifically group dynamics, expert bias, and other sorts of biases, as well as literature on collaboration games. And then to borrow the term from an article from Stefan Szymanski in 2020, whether sports analytics is really science or alchemy, there is not a lot of literature that I'm finding that would offer extensive insight into which criteria are necessary to win sporting contests. So I'm hoping to sort of contribute to the ever-growing literature here, but without running too much further ahead, I think I've only located 3 papers that look at, specifically at combat sports in this area. So in terms of strategic positioning and where UFC stands, so I think many of you have seen Ultimate Fighting Championship being advertised or being somewhere in the news in terms of, whether it is associated with the scandalous, owner of it, Dana White, or whether it be associated with any of the fighters, or whether you genuinely follow mixed martial arts. But there has been a significant rise to prominence where it has started as, basically a league that would perform in different concert venues around Las Vegas. But now, because of this history, they are still holding about 61.5% of their events in the past 5 years in Nevada. So their headquarters in Las Vegas, and it is the de facto home base. But occasionally they would go on the so-called traveling shows, right? On, that would be set globally or within the US and other large cities. But then most of the fighters, judges, and staff, they choose to reside, they make a strategic decision to reside in Las Vegas, the so-called fight capital of the world. They are sort of mirroring a troupe of a traveling circus. And the best comparison I can find is not really World Wrestling Entertainment or other boxing promotions. That would be Cirque du Soleil. So they have a different history of how they sort of became permanent resident in several areas. But they began as a full-time touring circus. But now, while still maintaining touring shows worldwide, they have 8 permanent resident shows across the world. And, as the entertainment capital, right, fight capital, entertainment capital, those terms are used interchangeably to describe Las Vegas. They would also host multiple resident productions, meaning Cirque du Soleil in Las Vegas. So some more of the motivation, and I hope this is not too blurry. I tried to find as many excerpts as I could from news. There has been a lot of controversy around UFC judging decisions. So on the right, you see sort of the 3 videos. You're happy to go and look. This is Dana White going off for 20 straight minutes. If you want to put yourself through that, or I can just give you the time codes. And then it goes to as far as creating some conspiracy theories, where Joe Rogan would go on and say that MMA judges are not watching during UFC content. So essentially, they're being paid to not do their job. And I don't know, he's basically saying that they're doing something else other than judging. I'm not sure to, the extent to which it is true. But then on the other hand, we have sort of more articles from MMA specific, sports specific websites that would sort of look at different events as blatant robberies. So, and then, I'll explain how the fights are scored. But, a lot of the news and sort of being a mixed martial arts follower myself, I was thinking, well, could anything be done with the current bias that exists? So, sort of to put it in numbers, the first number is not mine. It is from BetMMA website. Over 60% of the media scores, and again, I didn't have the capacity, or it's outside of the scope of this project to look at media or crowdsourced scores, but over 60% over the past 12 years of the media scores disagreed with at least one judge's final scorecard. And then judges would also disagree with each other. The second figure is from my own research, so my data spans from 2020 to 2025. And around 31% of cases, at least one judge is at odds with the other 2 in the UFC. So mixed martial arts judging is highly subjective and much more than boxing. And we'll get to the system, of the source of this subjectivity. But really, the origin is that the criteria are complicated as well. They are open for interpreting. And why do I say that they are highly more subjective than boxing? Is because in boxing, you're only evaluating striking. In the UFC, however, you're evaluating much more. So we'll get to that after a scope of literature. So in terms of biases and favoritism in judging, there is a very lengthy literature on this topic. I try to center it around, some, recent papers that are not combat sports, as well as others that are combat sports. Of course, we all know that James Reade, the organizer, and the co-authors have had an article published on football and, judging bias in football and economic inquiry in 2022. Alex Krumer and co-authors had an article on ski jumping and nationality judging favoritism there in the Scandinavian Journal of Economics. And then in terms of mixed martial arts biases, there have been papers by Paul Gift, one in 2021, one in 2018, that I'm looking at heavily. He's a sport economist at Pepperdine University and a mixed martial arts licensed judge himself. So that is sort of looking at, judges themselves perhaps think to an extent, especially, the ones that are sport economists among the judges, which is a rare combination, that some biases do exist. And then there are, the 3 articles that I mentioned earlier that would sort of look at which factors actually influence fighter success on actually earning a victory on the judges' scorecards. There's the European Journal of Operations Research article by Holmes and co-authors. And then 2 other articles. Well, one of them is actually a book chapter that look at, well, what actually matters in terms of the fighters to win the rounds in mixed martial arts and other combat sports. And then where I see my contribution land is that this paper is evaluating the within group dynamics that are important to judging, as opposed to just looking at the external factors. So what happens within the group, the panel of judges. So continuing on the literature, there's also literature on strategic behavior by judges. So the paper I referenced earlier that was shared, which is forthcoming in JSC by Bauman and Singleton, that is the University of Stirling, that is looking at effectively what is happening with boxing, and there have been other strategic behavior papers before. And from the broader design of game theoretic insight for sports contest design, I didn't find much evidence except for, the really famous paper, very well-cited paper by Duggan and Levitt in American Economic Review from 2002 that looked at sumo wrestling and how there are broader implications of fixing those matches through judges, essentially. And then in terms of mitigating biases, there is this array of literature, which is, not very deep. And, I had to go as far back as 1988. And, once again, thank you to Carl Singleton for providing essentially the literature. I borrowed a lot of the citations from there and explored on that end. But essentially, where I am appealing to the literature is before we mitigate, we must gauge whether the true source of these biases is indeed taste-based, whether it's taste-based discrimination among judges, or whether it's lack of skills, and there's a skill gap between experienced and non-experienced judges. So a quick overview on how UFC fights are judged, how they're scored, and what I mean by judges' scorecards. So there are 3 officials that are seated cage side, similar to boxing, and they each use the 10-point must system, meaning the winner must absolutely receive 10 points, even if they won by a slight margin in judges' eyes. And the loser would absolutely must have to receive 9 or fewer points. So just for context, the 10-8 scorecard is complete domination for all 5 minutes of the round by the winning fighter. And that happens around 4% of the time. The judges go as far as awarding a 10-8 scorecard. 10-7 is almost unheard of. And anything below would almost be, either refusing to fight or, the referee not intervening and not stopping the bout after a complete beatdown for whatever reason. And then what I mean by complexity and ambiguity of judges' scorecards in UFC. So in this exact order, the judges are supposed to evaluate fighters based on A, striking, B, grappling, and those 2 I highlighted because those 2 are measurable. And we have statistics, we have parameters on how we can measure striking and grappling success. And I'm going to get to them later. And then C, aggression, meaning, well, how aggressive was the fighter with their punches, and D, octagon or ring. Sometimes, well, it's not the case anymore, but UFC has this patented octagon shape, and I'm going to show you the diagram in a little bit. But essentially, the octagon control time comes forth if, all else being equal. And then the judges do not have these statistics on striking or grappling or, aggression or octagon control time that they can reference in real time. So subjectively, at the end of each round, they put down a 10 or a 9 or below for one of the fighters, and then they submit this part of the scorecards. So judges score rounds independently, and there's no collaboration or discussion that is allowed. And then on top of it, however, they know who are they going to be working with before it begins. So then the Mixed Martial Arts Commission in the respective state or country where the UFC event is held posts the assignments beforehand, and they're widely shared. And it's also double verified by certain referees like Mike Beltran, actually posting the assignments on their Instagram or other social media before the game. So to me, that is all very reminiscent of a behavioral economics lab experiment that is single blind, that who you're working with, but you don't know, their priors, but you don't know what sort of 10-point, what they award on the 10-point must system. So just to show this is the usual UFC judges scorecard template. This is exactly the form that UFC uses to post their scorecards online. And they actually haven't made their scorecards public till August 15th of 2020, and this is where I start collection of my data. They had only scorecards that were actually deduced from the announcement that, with the fights that went to decision. However, it did not include the fights that end in either submission or a knockout prior to going to the judges' scorecards. And this is a little diagram of the patented octagon shape. So those three chairs in the bottom left, they would indicate where the commentators would be. So essentially, Joe Rogan, Michael Bisping, other former UFC fighters that they invite. And then the judges, and again, this is the approximate positioning. We don't know for sure because, they are not always indicated, within the crowd. And, I've tried searching the web on how, I couldn't even find any information about certain judges that are, very rare. Of course, the famous ones are easy to identify, but they're sort of seated apart and they're seated next to the cage. And they have no means of communicating to each other, especially in a busy arena setting, uncontrolling for some non-visual cues that, of course, we won't have access to. So, and then I really want to touch on before I, go to describing my data on why the judge selection mechanism here is exogenous. So judges are appointed not by the promotion, but rather by the State Athletic Commission that is regulating mixed martial arts at the event location. For example, the Nevada State Athletic Commission would assign judges to UFC fights held in Las Vegas. And in their criteria, as a judge, you have to be licensed in Nevada, in the state of Nevada, to judge mixed martial arts contests. And that is a very tall task. So only the best of the best get to judge in Nevada. And we're going to touch on that while it's important. And then while judge selection is intended to be exogenous to the UFC, the selection criteria are often opaque and they may be influenced. And this is where it's not a perfect exogenous treatment. That may be influenced by past experience, availability during that weekend. For instance, if a competing organization like Bellator is organizing another event, it would be hard, to, especially if it's a marquee event for Bellator, it would be hard to poach the judges to come judge for UFC that weekend. And also familiarity with major promotions like UFC, Bellator, and others. So what this means for my paper is that while judge assignment is not randomized, it is exogenous with respect to fighter characteristics. So I trimmed my sample a little bit. I know I advertised over 190, but there were inconsistencies in the data. So there are only 187 UFC events from April 15th, 2020, when UFC started officially posting their scorecards on their Twitter X page, to the start of 2025. And that is around 1,700 bouts. So each bout on the data set, meaning each fight, you want to call it that, I'm going to use the bout terminology, would include at least one round that is evaluated by judges, excluding, I'm excluding bouts that would end in the first round, maybe like a first round knockout. So then the judges don't even have the time or the need to submit their scorecards for that round. So as I mentioned, I source the judge names and scorecard values from the UFC's official X page. The bout statistics are sourced from UFCstats.com, that is providing detailed fight statistics and per round. And then the advanced fight metrics and bout odds, most of them are sourced by from this Kaggle data set, thanks to managed by Matthew Debert, and thank you to him for that. And for the fights that he does not have the odds for in that data set, I look at bestfightodds.com to fill the gaps. So in terms of the descriptive statistics, we're going to go one by one, and these are all of the bout characteristics that fighters can accumulate. So first of all, there are knockdowns. You see that the mean is very low. It's very hard to earn a knockdown, but Max Holloway has achieved 3 once in one round, which is very impressive. In terms of the percentage of significant strikes landing, about half of them land. We see that in the fourth column. But then, usually it's around 20 per 5-minute round, and it's about 43 thrown on average. And then columns 5, 6, and 7, the total strikes landed, they are sort of significant and insignificant. It's still sort of a black box how the official scorers decide on what is a significant, what is not a significant strikes. What I found, there is a high correlation of strikes being significant when they are thrown from either the stand-up position, meaning like your typical boxing or kickboxing position you would see, or strikes that are thrown on the ground from dominant position, meaning if you have mounted someone and if you are going to ground and pound, as they call it. So a lot of this jargon is UFC exclusive, and there's no way I can sort of describe this fast. But significant strikes are mostly from advantageous or stand-up positions. In terms of takedowns, this is where the mixed martial arts comes to it basically sources its name from. These are jiu-jitsu or traditional Greek-Roman wrestling or other forms of wrestling takedowns, where you physically use your arms and legs to take the opponent down. So they're attempted about one time per round, and they have about 20% landing accuracy. And then in terms of other things, submission attempts, they mostly come from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and other martial arts that feature submissions. That is essentially going to different form of technical positions like a rear naked choke or a neck crank or a what they call a twister. So, I mean, you can look this up, but, effectively, they don't happen too often. But, someone has attempted 5 in a single round. That is perhaps a fighter who has a pedigree in mixed martial arts that favor submissions. And then what a reversal is officially is going from a disadvantageous position to an advantageous position. Sort of, again, I'm going to go to the example of something I know. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu teaches a lot of that. Is essentially when you are down on the ground and you basically reverse the position where now you are mounting your opponent. And then these are the odds. This is something I didn't have in the previous iteration of this paper. So usually, officially, red corner traditionally is the favorite in the bout. But these are the true odds between blue and red corner in the fight. In terms of classification of judges by frequency of invitation, I divide them into frequently and rarely invited. So the judges that would appear in high number of events within the data set, so some of the usual suspects, if you follow mixed martial arts, that would be Sal D'Amato, Chris Lee, etc. That would, that are, mostly Nevada licensed, but not all of them. So we're going to get to it. And then they just have long established reputations for being accurate with athletic commissions and also high familiarity with UFC norms. So they are sort of the seasoned veterans, if you will. And then there are judges that are rarely invited. So they will have fewer appearances. They're often seen in either local or regional or international cards at the UFC, where there are commission-specific licensing requirements. So, for instance, the French Athletic Mixed Martial Arts Commission, they require a certain number of judges to be licensed in France. So this is why not all judges can be, so-called in-house within the UFC. And then I also, this is an addition from the last iteration of this paper, I also classify judges by being licensed in Nevada or not. And the logic here is pretty simple. Nevada overall is one of the hardest athletic commissions to get certified with because it's the most premier, again, it's the fight capital of the world. So to me, what it seems like is that mixed martial arts judges make a conscious effort to get licensed and reside in Nevada because it yields more bout assignments. So they are making a conscious effort to make it their full-time career. And this is why they tend to appear in high-profile title fights because, again, if you need a class on how to, say, judge certain, type of martial arts, odds are that class is being offered and the experts, the fighters, are all, mostly based in Las Vegas or have their camps held in Las Vegas. So that's the highest concentration per square mile of mixed martial arts gyms. And then non-Nevada licensed, there would be the judges that are appointed by another state or international commission. And then, what I'm seeing is that their scoring patterns may differ. For instance, if you're a judge that is licensed in the United Arab Emirates of Saudi Arabia, in that part of the world, they put a lot more emphasis on wrestling. So your preference-based judging will be different. So, and again, these are quick summary statistics of the number of bouts that they judge. Just a heads up, not all judges that frequently judge are licensed within Nevada, but for both of the cases, the judges that are either frequently invited or Nevada license constitute around 80% of the total number of judges assigned to bouts. And then the research setup that I have is first, for my own in-house purposes, I apply lasso logic to see which exact fight characteristics are correlated with getting awarded a 10 on the scorecards. So to penalize coefficients, I have basically 25 plus fight characteristics that we can measure in both striking and grappling outcomes. And then a 10 on judges' scorecards to me is the equivalent of winning a round. Then I use the coefficient estimates from the lasso logic to weigh striking and grappling differences to basically visualize using heat map the judges' consistency, just to show that basically seasoned veterans are not like unseasoned rookie judges or judges that are not invited frequently. And then after that, I basically evaluate an agreement across a frequency of invitation and licensing type. So we finally got to my first logic with the lasso selection. So just a quick note, here I'm looking at, under the lasso penalization, which is the lambda min is very, very low, meaning we get a lot of our inference from different set of parameters. So it's not excluding too many, but it's sort of reweighing them. So the following are significant and optimal. So knockdowns, significant strikes, total strikes landed, takedowns, submission attempts, reversals, and as well as control time in seconds. Looking at the log odds probability of judges' wins. So on average, a mean 10 is awarded around 50% of the time, which you would expect. It's slightly lower because I think in one of the cases, a judge awarded a 10-10 round, which you cannot really judge as a victory. And this is what you're supposed to do. The round is exactly equal. I cannot reasonably exclude that. I mean, even though I would be open to the idea of just excluding that, altogether in my explorations. And then these are the coefficients. So, for instance, if you have a knockdown in the round, that is almost certain to win your round if you're a fighter. So that would bring it up to about 95% certainty that you win that round. And then again, the lambda min is very small, kind of showing that a lot of these parameters are basically very important, so it didn't penalize too many. And then the McFadden's R square is right in the middle of the 0.2 to 0.4 range, sort of to highlight the high validity of this model. And then this is what I mean by visualization. So if you look at frequently invited versus rarely invited judges, and again, these are the influences of either striking or grappling. And once again, these are the two things that we can measure as opposed to aggression and in others. So we see that on the left, in terms of frequently invited judges, there's a lot more consistency in how they evaluate striking as well as grappling. So overall, they favor striking slightly higher and they slightly disfavor grappling. So again, they are sort of adhering to the importance criteria that are posted by the UFC in its own manual, that striking is first and grappling is second. However, when it comes to a much smaller number of rarely invited judges, they're effectively all over the place. We see some of the judges that weigh striking exclusively and don't really care for grappling accumulated stats, while still the majority of them are in the general area of where the frequently invited judges are. Some of them tend to sort of disfavor striking and then tend to overfavor grappling. And then in terms of, if you do a quick switch between them, there's almost, the same pattern that is forming, that Nevada licensed judges are licensed in Nevada for a reason, because they are also pretty accurate. At least they're consistent. You know what to expect. You don't really know what to expect when a newcomer is showing up at the scorecard for non-Nevada licensed judges. And then this is what the model that I use for, to gauge judge agreement and frequency. So the outcome variable here will be equal to 1 if all 3 judges agreed on the particular round winner in bout B and round R. And then the log odds predictor that I have is going to include the composition of the judging panel. So I'm comparing everything to the baseline of 0 rarely invited judges. That is my control group. So for bouts that have 1, 2, or even 3, in certain cases, rarely invited judges, I'm basically measuring, how much higher or lower the panel agreement would be in that case. The performance metrics are as before from my lesso-logit estimate, so knockdowns, etc. And then the controls, I look at the true betting odds difference, and then the dummy for empty arena. Spoiler alert, it doesn't matter. Betting odds essentially don't matter, but I highly value that recommendation from the earlier conference in 2024. But the empty arena dummy is something that I thought of myself, and that actually makes all the sense of why that would be significant. And then I also use fixed effects, like in boxing. There are weight class differences between fighters. So, for instance, they're the same classification as heavyweight, light heavyweight, middleweight, etc. And then also the bout position on the card. To me, judges perhaps they would choke under pressure, and there is some evidence in the literature of judges choking under pressure in competitive environments. So I would think that the later the bout is in the fight, the more weight it carries. But then also that is sort of a source of indigeneity, perhaps, that bad judges that don't have a history of evaluating contests very well, they wouldn't be invited to high stakes contests. So just to highlight the mean share of agreement, so the judging panels are in perfect agreement, according to my specification, around 76% of the time. And this is where the behavioral economics kicks in. So if you have 2 so-called experts and 1 rarely invited judge, this coefficient, point estimate, is negative, but not significant, meaning that if there are 2 experts in the room, perhaps if if you're a newcomer and a less experienced judge, if you know who you're going to be judging with beforehand, you know their patterns of judging, so you're more likely to agree. You sort of want to show, perhaps, for your career progression, that is, again, my hypothesis, that you can be in sync with the experienced judges. So they don't, often deviate when there are 2 experts in the room. So, they would hate to be the third wheel. However, when there are 2 rarely invited judges, so there's 1 formal leader, the agreement falls from about 76 to around 69% in those types of panels. And that, to me, I think is indicative of basically everyone kind of sticking to their priors and not being subject to expert bias as much. And what is happening with 3 rarely invited judges, again, this might be the sample size because there are only about 160 rounds like this, where all of the 3 judges are not experts on the panel. But then again, the point coefficient is negative, but perhaps it is the case where it is about the characteristics of those bouts that they were clear winners. So, and then in terms of the performance metrics, so if we click here, something that I want to highlight is that takedowns or grappling techniques, grappling stats, are causing a lot more controversy. So you see that for takedown landed and reversals, which would be grappling-based statistics, they cause a lot more disagreement in percentage terms. So judges don't have a homogeneous assignment on how to grade takedowns and reversals. And again, the odds difference here is non-significant, but the dummy for empty arena, so for the arenas that are empty, like, for instance, that happened in UFC Apex in the midst of COVID, and on Yas Island in the United Arab Emirates also during COVID, you see that from 76 it jumps to around 87.5% agreement when the arena is empty. So now if we go to the next specification, the only thing that is changing here is that now I'm looking at the Nevada-based judges. So the baseline case now is that all 3 judges are licensed in Nevada. And then the dummy variables would be that none are licensed in Nevada, 1 or 2 are licensed. And then again, the fixed effects, the controls, and the performance metrics are as before. And what we're seeing here is that for no Nevada licensed judges, we see that agreement falls, very far when there's again no, it's just another specification on what an expert would be. So when there's no expert in the room, there's a lot of disagreement. When there's only one Nevada licensed judge, again, not perceived as a true leader, there's a significant decrease to mean share of agreements in those types of panels. And then when there are two Nevada licensed judges, again, there's sort of this yo-yo effect that I'll try to explain in the next table. Sorry, in the next slide. So in terms of the summary of key takeaways, to me, knockdowns, control time, and total strikes landed have the strongest statistical connection, with being awarded a 10 on the judges' scorecards. However, grappling-based metrics, as I showed, can cause a lot of disagreement. To me, belief perseverance is pretty evident. Judges' agreement likelihood significantly drops when rarely invited or non-Nevada-based, non-Nevada licensed judges are present on the panel, suggesting the lack of collaboration or maybe diverging standards across judging from different regions of the US and the world. And then what we know from the earlier heat map diagrams is that Nevada licensed judges are very consistent. At the very least, they may not be perfect, but at least that they're consistent in the proverbial calling bowls of strikes and in assigning 10s or 9s. Then as I mentioned, with empty arenas, we see that the likelihood of agreement is increasing, and then the gap in odds, so the matchup characteristics don't really matter as much. So, and the yo-yo effect in expert bias maybe would be observed in the judging frequency, due to sample size issues. But there's at least a theory, a recent theory by Kahneman and Klein from 2009, that one expert would be worse for agreeing on the scorecards, that perhaps they know that the two others are going to agree. So that is the proverbial failure to disagree effect that we perhaps might be observing here. So the key implication here would be that, again, judging disagreement would stem for, more from group composition and calibration issues than measurable performance ambiguity of these judges. So I test two extra things. So one would be the personal bias. So I just asked a question, well, do some judges purposely disagree with others? Is there something that you're seeing that, well, if I'm paired with someone else I absolutely hate, I don't know, maybe they ate my lunch, or I just had a previous running, or I just don't like the person, I might be purposefully disagreeing with them every single time, sort of like the grim trigger strategy in place. And what we're seeing here is that we're reverting to the connectivity, the network theory, and we're seeing here that there are a lot of judges with basically very low clauseness centrality, whereas Sal D'Amato, the big yellow circle in the very center, has a lot of connectedness to a lot of the judging panels, the judging pairs. So in terms of the mean share of disagreement in pairs as opposed to panels, that occurs around 17% of the time. And then the coefficients here are from a linear probability model. So that will be the percentage increase on the mean share percentage. So we see that none here are significant. So first of all, the betweenness centrality, and that is again how that is the measure of how in network theory, how long does it take from you to to pass through many other nodes? That essentially is very non-significant. In terms of closeness, meaning how easy it is to get from your node to any other, we also see that while the coefficient is positive, it is very insignificant. And then the dummies for both judges to be licensed in Nevada is also non-significant. And then for any of the judges in the pair to be rarely invited is also non-significant, although negative. And then we see that the adjusted R-square is pretty high. So we're seeing that maybe perhaps all of that stems from a lot of pairings. So I'm just going to show you really quickly the top 10 most disagreeing judges. So you see that the pattern is all of them, they disagree, but they don't really judge a lot. So neither of the judges, on the list have worked more than 14 rounds. And then what's even more important is that there are no Nevada licensed judges here. So that means that regulatory training works. So yeah, train your employees, your potential employees, as the Nevada Athletic Commissions to later on help them stay off of this list. And then the top 10 most agreeing judges, 7 of the 10 of them have judged 24 plus bouts, and then and 7 of them are from the Nevada Athletic Commission. So again, Sal D'Amato, someone I mentioned, combines high volume as well as consistency, as well as a positive coefficient on agreeableness. So that is, again, something interested. And then there are some outliers, certainly up here, number 1, 3, and 4. But, they're judges that just happen to have scored, evenly with everyone else. So going further, the last thing I test is, well, does it matter for bout outcomes? So I calculate this variable called snub, and that is, another conditional logit that I apply here, is whether or not the fighter in bout B would receive a total judges score below the predicted score, despite doing enough to win. So scoring above 28.5, according to the model of fight predicting characteristics, or above 47.5 across 5 rounds. So if you do the math, that amounts to over 9.5 per round, which means that you're averaging, strictly a 10 per round that would win you the bout ultimately. So, and then I'm looking at, on average, according to my classification, snubs occur about 10% of the time. So around 10% of the time, the model of, that excludes judging bias would be better in predicting the winner of the model, or would deviate from how the judges scored it. But then we see that when all 3 judges are licensed in Nevada, while that coefficient is positive and it matters for, having a high probability of a snub, it's again non-significant. And when any of the 3 is rarely invited, that is again, negative but non-significant. So I'm not seeing that, that is somehow that, the probability of snubbing someone on a judge's scorecards is a function of the licensing or the invitation frequency. And then how consequential are individual cases? I'm just going to wrap up with this, that some fighters may argue that very much so. You see that Rob Font, who has fought twice in marquee events that were both 5 rounds, he was objectively, snubbed in terms of how much he has done during those fights and how the judges scored the contests. So he would have clearly won those 2, and that is career altering. Another thing that I noticed, in the top 15, 7 of the fighters are women. And that maybe comes to the idea of maybe having more women judges. Right now, there's only one that is very frequent, Adelaide Bird. She is the wife of, I'm forgetting his first name, but a boxing referee. So they're a referee couple that referees a lot of mixed martial arts contests. But we see that during a lot of these cases, so say case number 7 and number 15, that is arguably also career altering for Jocelyn Edwards, who, in my subjective opinion, is underranked to the skill level and the output on the canvas inside the octagon on what's happening. So again, 7 out of 15 top snubs, most significant snubs, are all women, whereas women don't constitute 50% of the bouts in the UFC. So just quickly to wrap this up, judging is behavioral and not robotic. This would reflect, in my opinion, human calibration, not necessarily ambiguity in the rules. The composition of panels would matter. So not just fighter metrics that would shape consistency. So Nevada licensed judges are objectively good, and they earn their bread by essentially being good at what they do. Around 10% of the fighters are objectively underscored, but these snubs do not appear to be systematically driven by either newcomer or licensing status. And then finally, I would ask that the UFC would reform the panel, maybe institute some form of a filibuster by adding more judges per bout. So disagreement is sort of less propagated through say 5, 7, or even like 9, 11 judges, right? So the higher the number, but of course it has to be the odd number so that there is a clear winner. Or maybe diversify mixed martial arts pedigrees. This is something I started working on, but again, this is sort of a rabbit's hole here. There's not a clear evidence of, mixed martial arts has not existed forever, but these judges have come to mixed martial arts from other martial arts, like say boxing or jiu-jitsu. So does their pedigree and what they were trained as a martial arts judge, does it sort of matter? Does it stay with them? And then as a policy suggestion, something that the UFC can do is to increase transparency in judge selection and also formalize the panel composition standard. So once again, before we actually look at robotic scoring or ushering in the robotic umpires in sports, we should look at the belief perseverance. And to me, in combat sports, judging is not exclusively cognitive, is also structural. So there will also be belief perseverance that we will not be able to get rid of unless we fully get rid of human judges or human error in that regard. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for your attention, and please follow up via email. And of course, there are going to be questions here. So thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Georgy. I'll give you the team's round of applause. Really interesting talk, introducing certainly me and maybe others to the world of UFC. So thank you very much for that. We've got plenty of time for questions and comments. So if anyone does, please do raise your hand. Yeah, well, I'll ask one out of ignorance first of all, Georgy. I must have missed it at the start, but judging by your comments at the end, the way it works is there's 3 judges and they just decide who's won. And if 2 say one player's won and the other say the other one, then that person's won, and then the scores matter down the line or something.
Yes, so effectively, the judges have to evaluate every round that has ended. So meaning the fighters have 5 minutes, and then you can end the bout prematurely by knocking out or submitting your opponent. But what happens in bouts that go to the judges' scorecards, as they say, that's sort of the proverbial saying, is that on the cumulative scores after 3 or after 5 rounds, they sum up the 10 and 9s or below from each of the judges per fighter. And then usually you would see, for instance, if it is a 30 to 27 decision, that means the winning fighter won each of the rounds 10 to 9. And then there are more comfortable decisions. Sometimes, draws can be awarded, but, I exclude, penalties for things like low blows or like illegal actions in the octagon. But then effectively, yes, this matters long term, because while we don't know this for sure, and UFC is one of the most secretive organizations to disclosing how much the fighters are being paid, but we know there is a bonus of 50,000 for knockout or submission, so for early finish, and we know that the winner for sure is getting more of the purse compared to the loser. But there are different rumors that are saying this is like maybe in the low 5 figures for a loser and slightly higher for a winner. So it would have an economic impact for individual fighters, as well as promotion impact, is that there are rankings and the top 15 in each of the weight class division are ranked. So, effectively, if you continue winning bouts, you stay in the UFC, you move up the rankings ladder. If you keep on losing and get, sometimes getting snubbed on judges' scorecards, doesn't really matter. The UFC is not going to prolong your contract. So they sign contracts per number of bouts usually. So they're not like, they're not staying with the UFC forever, these fighters. They can go in and out sort of and fight for other organizations. But thank you. That's a great, I'm sorry I didn't clarify that earlier.
No, you may well have done. It's just that I may have completely missed it when you did. So, no worries. Thank you for that. Questions and comments? Anyone have any questions and comments?
Well, if you happen to later on, again, my email is just like my last name, Shukaylo at umich.edu. So, yeah, I'll be happy to communicate over email or, share the manuscript. And yeah.
That's great, Georgy. Thank you. I guess one I will also ask while I'm here is you mentioned it again at the end. You mentioned more transparency in judge selection, and you may have covered this again earlier on. But is there any transparency at all at the moment, or are you basically saying introduce some transparency? Is there anything known about how judges are assigned to a bout?
Well, what we can infer from historic assignments. So the transparency is about, several days before the event, the State Athletic Commission, so the .gov web page, will publish the list of um, the list of um, uh, judges that are assigned to certain bouts. So that we know the names, and that is perfectly, there's no asymmetry of information. Everyone knows that. What we don't know is the exact criteria on how the judges are selected. So, meaning, of course, we know that you have to be licensed in the state or jurisdiction in which you are about to judge. So that we know. So then sometimes some judges that are, say, not licensed in New Jersey when UFC does its annual event in Prudential Center, the home of New Jersey Devils, the NHL team. They would essentially invite more of the New Jersey judges. So it can be compiled from different workbooks, but then again, it's also opaque in terms of that, like some judges that are basically making it their absolute commitment, like Sal D'Amato is licensed everywhere, so and is one of the more high-profile judges. So odds are he's going to get invited to a lot more. So he's sort of the equivalent of Pierluigi Collina in football,
Right.
if you will.
Yeah.
So a very high-profile, consistent, strict judge that is sort of not allowing any room for ambiguity. So again, these are opaque, but we know something about the assignment, but not everything, certainly. And what I'm advocating for is that more will have to be known to the public so that, later on we don't get this mess of articles and tweets out there saying that, oh, there has been another snub on the judges' scorecards, and who are these people that are judging this contest?
But have you done any kind of, you mentioned the predictable aspects to it. I wondered if you'd maybe done some analysis of that. Is it possible to look at and get a sense of, these are higher profile judges are being assigned to particular types of games, maybe more potentially contentious ones, or just ones that are more likely to be higher in demand, that kind of thing?
Not extensively, and thank you for the comment. I will look at that closer. I think well, it's partially captured by the bout order effects, fixed effects that I institute. So I at least account for it that not all bouts are the same. So the first bout in the card, when no audience is present and everyone is still making their way in, it might matter for individual fighters, but they are sort of in the 50s, 60s, the warm-up bouts. And of course,
Right.
you're not going to assign a rookie or an inexperienced judge to judge the title bout that happens in the end of the night. So, I would want to do heterogeneity checks on that. So thank you.
Yeah. Pete's got his hand up.
Given the increase in the amount of gambling, legal gambling in the United States, is there been any fear of malfeasance? I know you're not asking that question directly today, but is there fear of malfeasance going on that might some judges bias because of that?
Yeah, thank you very much for that comment. It very well could be. The unfortunate part is that I only have official scorecards for each of the rounds, so published by UFC. dating back to August 15th, 2020. And if I'm correct, Nevada has already had, and where the bulk of the events are, Nevada has already had legalized sports gambling
Yeah, that's
in
true
the
for
state.
years.
So it would be interesting to look at maybe events in different U.S. jurisdictions, but again, there will not be plenty of them, so it's a small sample size. But I might catch something of significance in future research there. For instance, if say the event happened in say Massachusetts before it legalized sports betting, and then after, but then again, there will only be one. So yeah, it will be interesting to look at. I'm just afraid that the sample size is not quite there
Yeah,
because of the infrequency of these events, unfortunately.
yeah, I knew it was tangential, but that's becoming more and more of an issue in the United States.
Yep,
Maybe it's always been an issue.
I hear you. Yeah, right. Thank you, Pete.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pete. Another thought was the one name, given my ignorance, the one name that I recognised that you talked about was Joe Rogan, and obviously you also looked at you showed us the screenshot of the controversies, and judges being outed for not paying attention, that kind of thing. Is it possible to, I don't know if it's possible to identify those judges that have been identified in this way, and look at that potential impact of, I guess, some kind of social shaming effect on public performance, that kind of thing?
Um, well, yeah, that's another dummy variable that I can institute, sort of to go through the headlines and say, well, these are the judges that have been ridiculed by publicly by either Dana White or Joe Rogan, or maybe like high profile MMA specific blogs or sites. But um, yeah, this is something I should think of. But then again, while at least in watching some of those videos, while the UFC is very well, I don't want to say professional, but is very consistent in um, admitting to the judges not performing well and admitting to there being an incorrect decision on the judges' scorecards where it mattered. They are very also professional in not naming those judges specifically. So there is no the terminology they use, like Dana White would say, "Oh, this guy, that guy," but Dana White is not going to say, "Oh, like Junichiro Kumejo or Chris Lee or Sal Diamato messed up in this bout." So perhaps like the whole card will be subject to this controversy, or like you say, public shaming. So maybe I could see that, yeah, if there are a lot of reactions, that can maybe be a one. But to me, it's not a simple binary variable. It's more like the degree of shaming that is, again, it will take some time to collect, but it's definitely the research can go this direction. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I guess it does depend on the extent to which there's a particular overall sentiment towards these guys. I'm thinking I always use football as my metric. Obviously, referees in football are always criticised. That's just simply the way it is. But then there is, of course, every month or two, there's a particularly big and contentious call that was missed or went wrong or something, and then you often find that referee is rested for a week, and doesn't get the next high profile fixture or something
Oh,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, knowing Dana White's temperament, I think there's something that he, as the president of the UFC, can tell the commission that organizes the bout, is like, yeah, if we ever come back to X location, never invite this person to judge again. Yeah, so that may happen, but yeah, I mean, thank you. These are very helpful comments.
I mean, it's just interesting from my perspective. Obviously, this kind of it's obviously something that I don't you know watch too much myself, and so obviously I'm an outsider looking in. But it always does amaze me the way in which these media pundits are very high profile and very well linked and very well connected. It seems in a lot of these kinds of sports like MMA that you're talking about. I think obviously I guess it must be a function of, I guess, the size of those organizing bodies relative to, I guess, I guess you hinted at it with your initial description of it, in terms of a traveling circus type setup. Any final questions or comments? In which case, thank you very much, Georgy. Thank you, everyone, for attending our first session back after Easter. We now have another break. There won't be a talk next week. I'm going to be at a maths and OR conference in Birmingham. And then the following week will be the Hihong conference. So I hope to see, like to see you there, Georgy, and I hope to see a few other folk there. And then we'll be back the following week on May the 16th, and we'll have Augustine Indico of Carnegie Mellon University in Qatar presenting Do Professional Athletes Choke When They Don't Have Time to Stop and Overthink? And as we finish, just another reminder that the Play the Game conference announcement is out. And if you're interested in that conference in October, the deadline for submissions is just before we next meet on the 15th of May. So do look out for that. It's in the reminder and it's in the chat. But otherwise, thank you very much, everyone. Good to see you all. Wish you all a great weekend and see you all very soon.
Yep.
Thank you.
Cheers, Georgy.
Thank you. See you soon.
Cheers. Bye-bye.